Hey everyone, welcome to a special episode 35 of Caster Calls with ZombieGrub, where I take this opportunity to discuss the past, present, and future of the podcast, and then also figured it was a good time to kind of insert myself into the podcast and kind of do an interview with myself. So I'll be answering some of the really common questions that I've asked people in the past, as well as just going over my story of broadcasting, since it's kind of all over the place. Plenty of interviews, plenty of YouTube videos, plenty of Twitch stream stories, but having it all in one place might actually be kind of cool. So yeah, that's what episode 35 is going to be about. So it's kind of episode 35 with ZombieGrub, about casting calls with ZombieGrub. So super meta, I guess. As you can see, I believe I'm also in my new place for the first time, since I do a lot of these interviews and recordings ahead of time. I think the past 35 have all been in my apartment, and I've moved out from there, so it looks a little bit cooler, a little bit nicer. So that's cool. That's the news. So I guess just dive right into it. I don't want to do a whole lot of editing here, kind of keeping it as real as when I do interviews. But yeah, to dive into it, I guess first and foremost, the past, present, and future of Caster Calls, the podcast. So I started this project back in, I think it was after Katowice. Yeah, so I wanted to start it for a few months before that. I had the idea, and I was talking with some people about it, and it just kind of seemed like this thing that would be cool, but then I really don't know if I was ever going to do it, because habit of not bothering to try things out of probably fear of failure, if you really wanted to get psychological and all that stuff. But no, we won't. So I finally just decided to dive in and do it, and it really helped being able to interview some of my best friends in the esports community first. So over half, definitely, probably still at this point, after 34 guests, I would say probably like 60 to 70% of them are people that I've met in real life and had really fun discussions with, and I'm just like personal friends with. So that was really nice. But then I made 40 to 30% of just esports contacts, of kind of reaching out and being like, hey, you don't really know me, but I'm in this esport and you're in esports, and it'd be really cool if you came on. And I would even offer, actually, a lot of people, I'd ask, like, if you have any rates, please, give them to me, and I'll see if I can work it out. Even though I've never reached the goal on Patreon to actually pay anyone. And almost all of them were like, nope, this is a professional courtesy type of thing. I just, they all wanted to support the idea of esports and, talking about broadcasting in such a concentrated format. So it's been really cool to meet all these new people, but certainly starting off with people that I knew and kind of felt like it wasn't really a drag for them to be brought on, was really quite helpful. So I even asked Fear Dragon if he would be my test subject, which ended up being the first episode because there really wasn't anything wrong with it. It's been a process of experimentation. Just, there are a lot of things in life where you just have to do something and then you kind of work out the kinks afterwards or figure it out as you go along. And that's actually what most of content creation is kind of supposed to be, is wanting to do something and then doing it without really caring about the quality necessarily. And then if people like it and it's kind of rough shape, then improving on the quality, and then you also have something more in mind that you would want to execute. The more that we just kind of stay in the hypothesis and, what if zone, the less likely we're going to do something. So just getting it started was really great. And then moving on to kind of cleaning things up, getting some different types of guests. It's all been really, for me, a massive success, which is nice. I don't know if it's really ever going to be the type of podcast that is far reaching, that has a huge audience, as it's, a long form podcast, and it's something that's very peculiar and doesn't always hit the marks for a lot of people. But for me, it's been a big success. I've talked to a lot of different people, a lot of different esports, a lot of different careers, a lot of different experiences, history in esports, and it's about very different subjects. I've had some guests where we get a bit real. I've had guests where it's purely technical, and it's all been actually, in my eyes, very successful. There's a little bit of everything for anyone who's interested in the subject of broadcasting or even just esports. But again, 90 minutes is a lot for people to actually go through. So as far as looking back on the past year and couple months, that's how long this has been going on, I'm actually really quite happy with it. It's been very rewarding personally to do it, and then also professionally doing it. Just personally, I could actually say that I was doing this on a weekly or semi-weekly basis, and that I was keeping up on the calendar, which has always been a fear that I would just kind of let things, kind of fizzle away. And then professionally, as far as making money, or I guess, yeah, basically monetary value, no, definitely not. I think the amount of work that I put in has not really been, and I don't mean this to sound callous or like I'm counting the banknotes here, but it's not really been matched by the income. But that's not what's important to me. It never has been. I'm just very interested in the actual discussion. But what ended up being increasingly obvious and increasingly good for me. So at first I didn't think this was going to happen, but now I've realized that I ended up making a whole lot of contacts. Like, everyone that I've talked to has been super kind, even if they didn't really know me. And they've also offered, their time after the podcast to talk to me about stuff. And they've offered, feedback. They've said, yeah, like, hit me up later, or, I'd love to do a part 2 or anything like that. So I feel like I've made actually a lot of contacts in the esports world that, basically we agreed that we share a love of being on esports broadcasts. And that's kind of been the bro nod between a lot of people that I've met. So I think that's actually something that as I said, I didn't really see coming. I was always thinking of this as more like I was going to be this little like pee-wee peon, please sir, may I have some more, to a lot of the bigger names, that they would just be like kind of a nice little thing for them to do, but like charity work, and then they're just going to totally, forget me, and not harshly or anything like that, but just, a little blip. And instead, I ended up getting a lot of, I would say, really, what's the word I'm looking for, phrase I'm looking for, not just a lot of really nice people, but also a lot of professional respect, I guess. And that has been very rewarding. So again, as far as like the money goes, no, not really. But as far as making myself more well known in esports in general, and being able to know that I can do this thing, that I can go out, reach out to someone and be like, hey, this would be really cool. And to have them, I guess, respect me as, part of the industry, even though I'm not the biggest deal in esports, has been very, very important to me, which is why I want to continue doing this podcast kind of regardless of any other circumstances. That said, it is still a very, not difficult necessarily, and not even really that time intensive, but it can be a stressful thing to do. So I'd put that whole last little blurb there as the past of caster calls. I think it's been very successful. There's been more benefits to it than I've given it credit for, and I'm very happy with the past year. As far as the current situation goes, my feelings on it, as far as just what is the downside, what I would really hope to improve on or fix in some way is just the stress that can be associated with it, the social anxiety that can be associated with it. Because even though I've met all these lovely people and they've all been very helpful, there still is that idea of just like, I'm reaching out to these esports gods, to be super dramatic, and just kind of throw myself out there like, please, please, if I could be worth the time. And I don't think any one of these people that I'm potentially going to reach out into the future, or have done so in the past, or I'm not assuming that they feel like they're too big to talk to me. Like, I assume they're all very nice people, but you know what I mean? Like, it's just one of those things that you go and talk to someone that you respect and you admire, and it's always a little bit of like, gosh, I said the stupid thing, I said the wrong thing, I made it seem like I didn't appreciate it enough, or I just the awkwardness, right, that goes along with something like this. So for me, reaching out to people has always been just, oh boy, that's been a tough one. It's why I didn't really appreciate creating tournaments and organizing tournaments, because I really hated the idea of reaching out to players and literally just like hey, do you want to play in this tournament? And, the social anxiety would kick in if they just said no, or if they just wouldn't accept my friend request or something like that. And while I think I've gotten better about that over time in general, from a young lady who was scared to go up to the cashier, that was pretty bad, to where I am now, where I'll do it. It still isn't one of the processes that I actually like. And actually, Barrett, if you're out there listening, hello. He actually offered to reach out on my behalf to people, but then it kind of was like this weird feeling of like, well, I feel like that makes it a little more impersonal, and I'm actually kind of leveraging the idea that this is a very small passion project, and that I, as a professional in the same world with some recognition, and it seems better if I talk to them. So it was this really weird thing where Barrett's a great guy, and he's also in broadcasting, but it felt like it was going to make it too impersonal, and I didn't want that either. So I just it's been this struggle. Like, that is the main thing as to what makes this, for me, podcast difficult to do, is that thing in general. If I had someone who reached out to a billion people and just got back to me with, they're ready, I could do these interviews all day. I've done a couple of interviews, like 3 interviews in a day before. And it's tiring, and I can sometimes be bored of myself when I'm doing this, but I still would think I could do it the entire day. But it's just that one element of doing the podcast. So that's one of those things that I would love to work on. For me, besides actually entrusting that having someone else talk to people is okay, that would be step number 1. I feel like step number 2, and this goes into the future of the podcast, would actually be improving the podcast. So, a couple of things that I've been doing, besides trying to make sure that the audio quality is good, which actually Zencastr has been. So I guess technical problems are also a pain in the butt. Zencastr is the program that I was using, and it just doesn't work half the time, because the problem is that it says it's working, and you do an hour and a half interview, and then it's like, no, I wasn't. I'm just kidding. So that's a real bother. Don't know how to fix that exactly, but I'm looking into alternative solutions, some that are even paid, because Zencastr is free. Anywho, but other things that I've been doing now are I actually got some chapter notes up on every single video at this point, I believe. So now, instead of having to watch an hour and a half and kind of like scrub through it, you can just go right there on YouTube, and on the podcast, I think soon, you can go to something that says like their career or their opinion on this thing or something like that. So that's cost me a pretty penny, but I think that it's very important. So I'll be doing more publicizing of that, I suppose, and announcements of that. But that's all up. So I wanted to do that. Transcriptions also might be nice. I know that it helps people who have hearing difficulties, and in general is something else that can be done to help people kind of skim through instead of, again, having to listen to a very long podcast. So transcriptions might be something else that I'll do, which, is kind of just, it can be done like by bots apparently, but also I think this might also be something I just have to invest into. So we'll see. Let's see. What else do I want to do? I wanted to create highlights. So I've been trying to keep like mental notes of when something very interesting pops up so I can create a little clip and put it on social media, and I never really have gotten around to doing any of that. I think that would be nice. And then not just like little social media clips, but then also an actual highlight video of the episode that goes up a couple days after. That is, really the best little clips of it. And then you can go back and watch the full VOD if you want. That would be something really nice for such a long podcast. And I feel like there's a couple of other ideas that I've had, just making it more streamlined, more professional, easier to digest type of thing. And basically it's all time. But I think it would improve the overall quality. Otherwise, like the audio quality when things work, I think it's okay. The video quality is fine. Stream graphics don't need to be updated. So for me, it's really about ways of making this more digestible and shorter ways of getting attention to it. I guess I could also do a better job of actually advertising, kind of similar to, it's not really social anxiety actually, but the apprehension of like posting to Reddit or posting to any type of forum or place where you would do this is, one, subreddit rules can be strict. Like they don't want you to post something unless you're a regular. And then I just also don't really like drawing attention, which is, not great for content. So that's something I probably do as well, because I've never ever gone to any of the other subreddits. I've done interviews with Overwatch people and League of Legends people and Valorant people and Heroes of the Storm people and Brood War people, and I just never gone to any of those subreddits. Not that Brood War has a very active subreddit, but you get my point. Like it's not something that I've done, and that would probably be good. I've not really used the tags. Like there's improvements all around to be made, but for me, really those highlights are what I would really focus on, and then getting those chapter markers up, not just post episode, but actually in time for the episode would be one of my, I think, the biggest things as far as the production goes, is getting those chapter notes as the video goes up. But that's what I want to improve on, and that's also not just so that it's better quality and gets more viewers and more money and all that good stuff, but also because I feel like the higher the quality is, the more I can kind of leverage that, I guess might be the right word, when going to different people. Because while I'm still, I still want to offer their rate if they want to accept it, I also would just, like to be like, yeah, this is actually kind of like not a big deal, but it's a professional deal, and this is actually something that people are going to be referring back to in the future, which I don't know if it's necessarily that right now, because again, it is so much of a slog to go through all of these things. Right now it absolutely is. If you like that person or you like that particular esport, you go in, but if you don't, then you're probably going to skip a lot of them. It's also, in the future, I would like to myself be able to refer back to a lot of these episodes and a lot of the key moments and really, really nicely put explanations of things, because I do want to talk more about commentating and broadcasting in esports, and I want to do a video series that actually teaches broadcasting, and I think it would be so much better if it wasn't just me talking about my experiences and my opinions and me saying that these other things come from other people, but actually being able to be like, and this, and this are really good. Don't just take my word for it. Listen to Uber talk about it as well. I think that would actually be super beneficial, especially because these people just put them in ways better than I could a lot of the time. So I also want to use Caster Calls with ZombieGrub as kind of like research material, like reference material. Yeah, exactly. Reference material for some of the things I want to do in the future. So that's my overall summary, I guess, of Caster Calls with ZombieGrub. It's been a great year. Currently, there's some things that I just have difficulty getting over. And in the future, I would like to put more effort into it. even though that's not necessarily going to be an instant reward. I think it's all stuff that would be very worth doing. So that's the sum. And then I guess the last note on the overall podcast is that I do plan on bringing them back on a every 2-week basis, to be super clear. Probably in August or September. I'm going to guess September, actually, and then maybe even late September, depending on how a couple of gigs go or don't go. So that's my current goal now. So it is kind of a lengthy break, but as far as the podcast goes, I guess it's missing like 4 episodes. Plus the ones I've already missed this past month, I guess. But yeah, it's maybe not overall that bad. Because I do want to do this for an extended period of time. Like, I don't see any reason to stop doing this, as there are just so many. There's so many people. There's so many. I can't even speak correctly. There's a lot of people in esports. And the more I looked into it, the more I was like, damn, there's a lot of professionals in esports. So it's not like I'm going to run out of people who would do this podcast. I'm not going to run out of people who do esports, and I'm not going to run out of people who are kind enough to say, like, yeah, don't worry, but you don't have to pay me. Because honestly, if every guest I interviewed was like, here's my day rate of $150, I'd be like, oh no. No one's day rate's that low, by the way. That would be like their hour rate or something. That wouldn't be so great. But anywho, that's the future of the podcast. So it will be returning on a regular basis. And I also would like to overhaul the Patreon. So patreon.com/zombiegrubs, currently on a per episode basis. It's kind of a tricky thing because while I created it solely for the podcast, as always, there's always just people who would like to support you as a content creator, and for various reasons don't want to do it through Twitch or see more benefit doing through Patreon, what have you. So I'm strongly considering putting it on a monthly basis, and I think I'm okay with this more than I was a year and a half ago, because I have been very consistent with the podcast. I don't want to be in a situation where I'm like, yeah, half the people giving me Patreon money, F you if I just decide I don't want to do it anymore. I want to try to be as clear as possible, but Patreon sometimes it's like, I don't know, people don't seem to care. Honestly, some people are really just like, no, this is the way that I support you, like, you do you. But I don't want to ever have someone be like, hey, I supported you 3 months ago and I didn't realize you were still getting money from me, and I'm gonna be like, I couldn't do anything about it, I messaged you 1 billion times. Yeah, you get the point. So that's also what's going to change in the future, is that the Patreon's going to be on a monthly basis, and then it's also going to have reduced rates, so it's overall good news, I suppose. It's going to have, everything I think is going to be less money, except maybe like the calls, caster calls, on call with ZombieGrub, whatever it's called. That might stay the same, just because there's a lot of weird people out there. So far, the people that have used it have been cool, but you never know. Anyways, everything else is going to be cheaper. So now that whole what's happening with the podcast thing is done, I think I've covered everything. I want to say I did. Yep. Now we can get on to, I guess, the caster calls with ZombieGrub portion of it. So if you have been watching my career since I first appeared on the big stage, you have been watching for a while, but you've also missed a lot of stuff. And if you've only been really watching the past couple of years, which actually seems to be a somewhat common thing that happens, people actually haven't been watching. The default assumption is that StarCraft viewers have been around since day 0, but that's not actually true. So if you've been watching only recently, then this might be a bunch of news for you. But let's begin. Let's go over it. Some place that I can always refer back to and see the history. And when I'm 80 years old, I can remind myself how cool I was. So I got into casting because I got it. Well, let's say I got into StarCraft because I had played StarCraft 64 on N64, knew about it when I finally got like a PC that actually worked, I guess. It was a Mac, actually, not a PC. And Blizzard games were one of the few games that would actually work on Mac. So I played Warcraft, and naturally I found StarCraft and StarCraft Brood War just along those same lines, because I was also into World of Warcraft whenever that came out. Blizzard, Blizzard at one point was a company that you played all Blizzard games, Now Blizzard's not great. But anyhow. So I played StarCraft 64 when I was young, eventually played through StarCraft Brood War when I was a teenager. And then when StarCraft 2 came out, I remember my brother asked me if I was going to get it, and I was like, I guess, seems kind of cool. I did get it, and I don't remember particularly what hooked me into it. I played the campaign, and as far as online multiplayer stuff goes, I'd never been someone who was competitive online. For Warcraft, I did play a couple of team games, and I was okay. I was okay enough to tell people when to stop being assholes to other people in team games, But the actual competitive aspect, no, I was an arcade player, basically. I played a lot of arcade. So shout out to like Tower Defenses and Life as a Villager and stuff. Coda Tag was the bomb. So, I don't remember why I started thinking about doing multiplayer, but one of the first memories I have is that my brother, my eldest brother, asked if I wanted to 1v1, and in preparation of this 1v1, I actually watched a couple of videos. And I feel, if I remember correctly, it was a TVT. I don't know, my brother had actually played Zerg in Brood War, I think, and I was always Terran, because I remember building plenty of missile turrets against my other brother's carriers. Fucking Protoss. But anyways, it was a TVT for whatever reason, and I think my brother Reaper rushed me. This was like, 2010 Wings of Liberty. And I held it, and I won. And I think his exact outward message was, GG, I guess, or something like that. Or GG, you're the better player, or something that was nice, but I think had a little bit of saltiness to it. And I just remember feeling like the exhilaration and just being like, oh my God, like I did something correctly and I beat the guy who's always beaten me in video games, because I'm sure if I had played competitive video games aside from StarCraft 64, I would have eventually started beating them, because I did beat them in Super Smash. But in StarCraft 64, I could never beat my brothers. Or my friends, actually, that too. So I finally did this, and I just remember feeling really, really excited about it, and also really, really stressed. I had ladder anxiety for years. But I still played, and what I would do is I would play team games or 1v1 obs. It was really popular back in the day. So I would never have that actual ladder anxiety. And this was before unranked was a thing. So I never had ladder anxiety if I was competing. It was just really just the idea of ladder for some reason. So I got pretty good, and then when I would play 1v1, I'd obviously be in the incorrect rank because I was actually practicing elsewhere. So that always made me feel good. And eventually, in like 2011, I got to Masters. I remember the first time I did it, I went downstairs and told my mom, and she was like, well done, dear, and didn't really care. But I got to Masters, and I think around the time that I was Masters, but I'd actually placed in it, I was hanging out with a bunch of people from Force Strategy Gaming, which is actually a YouTube channel still, but doesn't do StarCraft anymore. It was very popular. It's still popular, but it was very popular to have every content creator, and they're mostly YouTube content creators back then, because it was still Justin TV, to have chat channels in game, and then that would be where people met each other. So I think I met this guy in Force Strategy Gaming. If not, then I met him at the PMS H2O clan or somewhere else I don't remember. And unfortunately, I don't remember this guy's name, but he was really cool. And we were watching a tournament. We played in it, I think, and we bombed out. And we watched it, and we were like, we could do better than this caster. So we did. We streamed ourselves casting a couple of games in this open bracket tournament. The caster got rightfully upset with us, I suppose. But this is like a rinky-dink, very small tournament. Didn't really seem to have a lot of rigidness to it. Like, we didn't know we were doing something bad. But apparently the caster was a bit upset. The organizer actually liked us and was like, do you guys want to come back on? I don't really remember doing a whole lot more of that tournament, but we might have. I don't remember. But that kind of started this idea that, I guess I could try casting. Because at the time, especially when I made Masters, I I was putting a lot of thought into actually trying to compete. I remember looking at some of the Pro-Am tournaments that were being announced and being like, oh, maybe I could do this. Kind of the same as a lot of people, where I just didn't really have a concept of how hard it was to be a pro. But I also didn't really put a lot of effort into it. It was a lot of thinking. It was a lot of effort. And then I also had wrist issues. Like, I was going to physical therapy for what they said was repetitive stress injury. It wasn't actually. Ended up being more of a neck problem. I could go into that as a whole thing. So I didn't have enough time to put in. It was literally a case where after a couple of hours on the PC doing anything, I would feel pain. So I wasn't really inclined to continue doing PC things. I still had ladder anxiety. Like, I'd play 3 ladder games every other day to keep master's rank. Eventually, I joined a clan while also doing a lot of clan war casting. And this clan was called StarCraft 2 Strategy. And it was an actual team. Neeb was on it back when he was Terran. And then he got poached by a Dignitas or something. I don't remember. During one of the tournaments. Actually, it was funny. And that's when I was probably one of my best years in StarCraft. I was definitely Masters 1. Maybe I could have pushed the GM. But again, I was not practicing very much. That was a really awesome time. I had a lot of fun playing StarCraft. And I was doing a lot of StarCraft casting. Because I'd applied to and gotten picked up by the URTL, the Underrated Team League, which I remember getting the confirmation letter or the message saying, like, yeah, you can be one of our commentators, just work on your, monotony, basically. And I remember being really excited. I was in a PC bong with a bunch of other StarCraft people in my community, and we were playing Brood War, I think, actually, but I was really excited, even though this also was kind of like a rinky-dink tournament. Back then, it was actually probably pretty good. I seem to remember 500-ish viewers for this Team League tournament. So, not bad at all. That's where I met a couple other co-commentators that most did not stick around, but Fear Dragon was one of them. So that's where I first met Fear Dragon back in like 2011, 2012. And also, I had been picked up by Clarity Gaming to be a caster as well. At some point in there, they helped me go to one of my first events ever, which was the Red Bull New York, the one where Scarlet versus Bomber happened. And they were like, we'll get you a media pass, and you can stay at the Clarity House, which is like on the beach, like an hour away. And so I went there by myself on my first solo trips, and I remember meeting a lot of the people who are still in esports today, but more on like the back end of things. So, or they're other game developers or what have you. So that was a really, really fun experience. The idea of like being in the media room and like having like the pros like walk around. I interviewed Golden. Like, I was supposed to do content while I was there, and I interviewed Golden. But apparently, like, the interview got lost or something like that. So I just wrote up a transcript, actually, on my TL blog, if you guys want to go read it. Because I really liked this interview, and it was so nice to me, and it was just one of the first times that I ever got to really talk to a pro, and I was just, like, so, like, Korean fangirl at that time, too, and I was so into Korean StarCraft and watching the team leagues and pro league when it came out, and I was a huge boxer and SKT fan, as you can see behind me. So this was like the biggest of deals. And it was also just a big deal because I actually met a lot of people, and I found out that I could be social if I was in the right zone, the right type of people. And then what happened? I think I went to MLG Raleigh either before or after that. I'm actually not sure. That was the one where there was a WCS that was Scarlet versus Vibe in the finals, but it was also an MLG. There was 2 tournaments happening. WCS was very different back then. And I think Orlando was happening at the same time or something. No, that was New York. Hold on. No. So Raleigh, I went to that, had fun just being a fan. I accidentally went to IEM New York because we were going to Comic-Con. Like New York Comic-Con, and IEM just happened to be there. I had no idea. So I went to one of the first ones as a fan and saw Fruit do their bomb out. And that was one of the first tournaments that Dong Regu won. And let's see here. Kind of a mix muddle of I don't know what happened during those years, but I do remember eventually I was commentating enough that I decided to apply. Yeah, I remember this now. So I was working with a guy on Clarity called Word, and I actually think he was a great commentator. He was a great co-caster as well. I really liked working with him. And Curran was our observer, which is really cool. And remember thinking that we were pretty good, and I decided to apply to cast for the MLG community cast, which was not as small of a deal as I might make it sound right now, because at the time it actually kind of, like, I had to like build myself up to apply to this thing. I still wasn't really well known. I was doing some of these smaller tournaments. I was still getting the same comment, is this Scarlet commentating? Because God forbid there's more than one woman. And I remember being like, oh, I don't know if I want to do this. Like, what if they say no? And my father was like, the worst they could say is no. There's really no downside. So I was like, okay, fine, shoot. Like, I'll just shoot. I'm going to write up the application and then just like leave the computer and not check on it. type of thing. And I got in, and I don't know if I worked with Word in that particular event, but I worked with someone that I did remember I enjoyed casting with, and someone that not as much. But it was this really like super like huge organized thing. Community casts nowadays are basically dependent on who is the community caster will get the most viewers. Their brand, their Twitch, Morty basically right now. But back then, the MLG BCD stream, or ABCD, and then the main stream was just MLG. I don't know. That was they would all get like 2,000 plus viewers, and then sometimes upwards to 5,000 viewers if you got a particular good match that the mainstream didn't want. So it was orchestrated by like Axetos and Axlab, I think, because they were like constantly in touch with us, and it was pretty big success. I remember it was one of the first times that people were like, "This chick ain't half bad," and they kind of started to remember my name. I had gotten Apollo the kitten, at that time. So I was like 21. And I just gotten Apollo the kitten, and I used him to fill downtime. So I think, yeah, I actually do. It was with Word. Yeah, it was. And I remember Engine, the Korean commentator, actually tweeted a screenshot of me holding up little tiny kitten Apollo. And I don't know what he said in Korean. I think it was just something like, oh, it's a really cute cat. But I just remember being like, basically dying at that point. I was just so like, oh my God, oh, I can't believe it. But that was the first time I think that ZombieGrub started to kind of get some like notice. And then Axetos and Axev were also really cool because, as far as I understand it, they had to fight to actually get us pay. Like, that wasn't the original agreement. They didn't say they were going to pay us, as far as I can remember. They just basically, after the event, came and, and said like, hey, we managed to find some money for you guys. And I think I got like $100 for the event. It was like in a check, got mailed to me. So I think that was the first event that I actually got paid for. That led to a boost of confidence that I also then, and I think this is the correct order, I also then applied to DreamHack community casts, which were more like it is now, which is like depending on your channel, you got a certain number of viewers. But even then, if you got like a Jadon game, which I remember getting one, you would get like 1,000 viewers on your channel if you're on the TL sidebar. So that was big for me because I was also doing it on my channel, I believe. There's a couple times where I did it on Fear Dragon's channel. And there's a couple times where he co-cast with me on my channel because there was a lot of dream hacks. I remember doing quite a bit of applying and casting. I also got picked up for what was then WCS Europe. Again, WCS has had many iterations. So if you're thinking 2018 WCS, that wasn't it. So 2013, 2012, I think, 2012 WCS Europe. I was casting with like Maddles and Penguin, I think, and maybe someone else I don't remember. And that was my first like big boy production, even though it was still online. And I remember I still didn't actually have to use a camera. I was very hesitant to use a camera, so I just used a picture of me from my brother's wedding. And I also was talking with Xander Fever, a lot of throwback names here, about working with him. He brought me on for a huge IEM qualifier. he was actually a fairly popular community commentator for a while. You probably don't know him because he basically bowed out of casting StarCraft around like 2013, I want to say, but he brought me on for one IEM, and that was also a big time where people were like, who is this chick? Oh, it's the chick from MLG, like that type of thing. So WCS Europe's like the most consistent gig. I got paid for it. It's all online. I got to be in the big boy production, like I said. And then at the similar time, I had gotten a message from Rifkin asking if I wanted to cast something, like a Go for StarCraft Finals. And since he'll tell the story, like I was the only person who responded. I don't remember my feelings about the email. I was just like, yeah, I guess, sure. I just asked like what time it was and went on. I didn't think our first cast was very good. I remember being just like, this was so awkward. I don't really know how to cast with this guy. You know, I prefer my Fear Dragon and my Word, I guess. And I don't know what he thought, but the community liked me enough that he brought me on more. So eventually, like months into working somewhat consistently, he was like on stream. I remember this. He was like, "This is going to be cheesy, but ZombieGrub, do you want to be a permanent fixture or something like that?" And I was like, yeah, I guess. Sure. So I was pretty much the co-partner owner of Base Trade TV, kind of. Thing is, Rifkin did most of the work. I was always under... the only thing I ever wanted to do was commentate. I wanted to be brought on to commentate and then see you later. See you next time. But as we continued to do more tournaments, my role got larger, more involved. I worked with him on producing the Hell It's About Time offline events, which was a lot of work, but again, he did most of it. And then we would do so many tournaments, and half of them would be like other tournament organizers would put on, half of them Rifkin would put on. We just continued just doing insane hours of work. And eventually, over 1-2 years, whatever, we eventually became the most stable, popular community cast. A lot of other people at that, they were leaving StarCraft, basically. This was post Wings of Liberty, so after Broodlord and Fester, a little bit into Heart of the Swarm, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. And there was a big outgoing of people. They didn't want to put in the effort for what they saw was a increasingly smaller scene, and they weren't wrong. But had a couple of them stayed in and done similar things, like continued creating content, but also more importantly found a co-caster, I think they could have done similar things. But that was a couple of things that we had going for us. Rifkin was a great businessman, and he didn't really care about looking foolish, which is a plus for anyone who's on broadcast. And he had the work ethic to continue creating tournaments. I had the work ethic to continue showing up and being really interested in StarCraft and playing StarCraft and having ambitions of being on the big stage. Now, these were kind of like dreams, like, wow, wouldn't that be cool? And I thought if I worked, I could do it, because I had also gone to the MLG studios to do an in-person studio broadcast of an IEM New York that MLG was putting on a community. They were the B stream, and Axotos and Axlev actually invited me to New York. Well, I was going to be there, actually, to be clear. I was going to be there. They invited me to the studio to do a couple of guest casts. And I remember that was also one of the times that In Control ever first noticed me. he tweeted saying that looking forward to good things from @ZG Gaming in the future. So I screenshotted it and I saved it. But anyways, I thought that I could do it, but I also had no idea of how to do it. And it kind of just got to a point where I was doing so much Base Trade TV stuff that this kind of exited my mind that this would be possible. And I actually felt quite comfortable with the idea of being a consistent community caster. There's a lot of things that were fun about it. But we had two people who bantered with each other as opposed to a lot of the solo casters out there. No matter how good of a commentator you are, it's always better to have a co-caster. Rifkin had more of a showman mindset than a I need to be the best StarCraft 2 commentator mindset, which people, didn't like him for. Some people were vocal about that. I didn't like him for it. And then I think overall it was actually a net gain, because whenever you turn into a base trade TV broadcast, you'd expect something silly and stupid to happen. Tons of memes were created, tons. And there was a really strong community. And, when we got like 5,000 viewers, that was kind of anticipated. If it was an okay-ish sized event, 5,000 viewers was actually pretty anticipated. And there was always a core community that were either chill or actively combating people who were bad. We had a really strong mod community. I think a lot of people that listen to us just listen on the background. I went to a summit when Blizzard was actively involved in StarCraft. They would put on summits, and I remember I talked to Tasteless one of the first times, which was such a cool thing. And he actually had mentioned, he was like, yeah, I listen to you guys. I turn you on, and it's kind of like listening to NPR for me, which is like, I like listening to your guys' voices. And I was like, oh, whoa. But that kind of like gave me like a little bit of a insight into why some of the stuff worked. And I didn't really think heavily on why it worked. I kind of just showed up and did the thing and tried to be the best StarCraft 2 commentator that I could be. But now looking back on it, I could see why it worked and why it was so good. But that was most of my StarCraft career until 2017. And more specifically, December 2016. So this is like 3+ years of working with Base Trade TV pretty much as a permanent fixture, I think. Something like that. And as I said, like I would have loved to have gone onto the big stage, but I just had never really anticipated it. But I started making friends with some of the other commentators who had originally I just kind of like watched and not known, but like specifically Maynard I'd become friends with. And he said that it was like, it definitely happened. And I was like, oh, I don't know. Well, I was in Korea, and there was I think it was like, not IEM Pyeongchang, that wasn't it. It was another event out in Gyeonggi. There we go. I think that's what it is. Well, I was there just because I love Korea. I got a message from a Romy who's a Nation Wars guy, and most well known for how attentive he is to the rule books. But he messaged me, I think it was him, and he's like, do you want to be part of the Nation Wars broadcast? And this was just like mind-boggling. I just like could not believe. And the reasoning was that, because of Nation Wars being a bunch of nations with less well-known players were coming through, that I would be a good fit because I cast a lot of these people that maybe the main stage commentators don't. So that was my first big event, offline event. And I went from being on like vacation in Korea to traveling to France for about a month to do Nation Wars. And it was a really fantastic time. It was so casual, so chill. It was like a perfect introduction. One of my biggest worries about doing a broadcast, like seeing myself up on the big stage, was that like I didn't think I was going to dress up very well. I mean, first of all, I didn't really have a style as far as dressing up. I'm always just t-shirts and whatnot. And I have a lot of acne scars, so I was always afraid like the makeup artist wouldn't be able to know what to do, or that there wouldn't be a makeup artist and I would look terrible. And just like general fear of being on camera, and a more high-def camera. Because even though I've been on camera all the time at this point, all the time, yeah, I started off with not even wanting to show my face. So I had that fear, but even though there wasn't a makeup artist for that Nation Wars, it just was so casual and relaxed. And Funka was such like a fun co-commentator, and Roddy and Todd were just complete professionals, very easy to work with, that I didn't really seem to ever care. I think I had brought in some foundation, so that was like pretty much I just did my own foundation to kind of cover like redness and whatnot. But that was it. And then I just learned how to be on broadcasts, on a studio broadcast right then and there. I had done Hell It's About Time with Rifkin. I had done the MLG studio thing, which don't go find that. It was so terrible. So I was like kind of used to the idea of being in front of a high-tech camera with a headset, but still very different. I got used to it pretty quickly because everyone was so chill. Loved the event, loved working it, and was like, damn, I'm going to get addicted to this. And I remember Maynard saying to me, like, you're going to get addicted to offline broadcasts. And he was right. But then after that, after like, you know, thinking like maybe that would be one of my big breaks, I didn't get nothing happened. Base Trade TV put on another offline tournament in California, which I felt a million times more confident in. So I even took the lead like in interviewing and stuff like that. And then 2017 Valencia is when Fear Dragon, I believe, got hired. And I remember this because I had actually gone to Korea for 3 months in 2017 because I can work from wherever, right? So I was there for 3 months, the longest that you can do a tourist visa. And Fear Dragon actually come to visit Korea as well. And I literally just like picked him up from the subway. And he was like, yeah, I just got a message that, you know, they're inviting me to cast. And not gonna lie, I was like supremely jealous at the time, really trying not to be a stick in the mud, not to try and be moody. And I was just like, holy shit, that's really cool. Kind of thing. But I don't remember if we had any conversations about it, but I thought like, damn, I really thought I would have been brought up. I thought I would have done something. So this kind of sucks, but you know, Fear Dragon's done a lot of good things to kind of put himself into that position, which we've talked about in his episode 1. So I was like, I guess that's that, you know. But then a couple months later, maybe 1 or 2 months later, towards the end of my visit in Korea, I went on a hike, like 12 hours. I kind of got lost actually. Came back. I was on the bus back to my place. And I got a message saying, do you want to work at Montreal? So most people would look at WCS Montreal as my first big event. And I'd say that it still is, because entering into the WCS circuit, into that atmosphere, is kind of that's the real door, you know? There's like tiny, like less important doors that come first, I guess. But that was like the huge door that if you did good there, then you were in, you know, you were at the top of the food chain. Well, you were on the top pyramid, you were at the bottom of that, like the top little food pyramid. So that was something that I really wanted to prep for. I put a lot of work into studying the game, and then put a lot of work into trying to figure out if I had a style. I even like asked like who the makeup artist was going to be, like trying to get in contact with them. Unfortunately, the makeup artist from Montreal, she's not professional. She's gotten better over the years, but she's not a professional makeup artist. She just is good with makeup. You know, it was okay. This might sound very shallow and unimportant, but to me, this was super important. So I was really nervous about that. I know I had worked with Roddy and Todd before, but I hadn't worked with anyone else. Honestly, In Control actually felt like someone who could be very difficult to work with because he has a very, very strong personality. But thing is that Fear Dragon, they'd already done an event with almost the same exact guys. He gave me a lot of tips, you know, and kind of prepped me for what I was getting into. And then Nate, who was the host at that event, pretty sure. Actually, maybe not. I think he was just a commentator. But he was there. Because I remember he was very intent on telling me, like, look, it's not about, like, you know, trying to list off all the details about StarCraft. Like, just chill, have fun, be entertaining, and it's going to reward you so much more. So I'd already, you know, wanted to go out and hang out with the guys. Like, I would have never been the type to go back to my hotel and study every single night. But that spurred me on even more to make sure to be part of the gang. So that's more so what I was focused on. They actually had a bit of a system for new people where they didn't put you on the desk first, because the desk is the most foreign thing to online broadcasters. Online broadcasters, we just start off with commentating what's in front of us. We don't have a desk segment. So he put me on one of the first casts with Maynard, which also worked perfectly because I felt very I was friends with Maynard, and I felt very comfortable casting with him. And because it was also Friday, so these are weekend events, Friday, no one really watches that. you can kind of yell your nerves out and kind of get the gist of the tournament and how you feel as a broadcaster before the eyes are really on you. And I think that was actually very smart of them to do. And eventually I did go on the desk, and that was where I had the most problems, probably. Because I thought I was stiff, didn't really know where to look, wanted to be casual, but didn't really have that confidence. So it was kind of, obvious acting. And I talked really fast, which I never really picked up on, but enough people had told me, like, you're talking too fast, slow down, that I try to take that into account. Do Montreal, good experience, don't expect much more. I literally have a talk with my father about, he's like, oh, what are the chances you're going to go to BlizzCon? And I was like, there's 0 chance that I'm going to be hired for BlizzCon. Never going to happen. A couple days later, Maynard's like, I think you're going to have a really surprising conversation. Because actually the guy in charge had offered to give me feedback. And I was like, I don't necessarily do great with feedback, but I recognize that I don't do well with feedback, but feedback's important. So for me, I'll get feedback and I'll be like, and then I'll kind of digest it for 10 minutes and be like, okay, I'm good. So I just kind of went into that that whole meeting, like, prepped to put on a really good face. If he was like, okay, here's all your problems, I was like, be tough, ZombieGrub. Basically, he just was like, look, you talk fast when you're on the desk, so slow down. But we thought you did a really excellent job overall. Do you want to cast BlizzCon? WCS Global Finals, excuse me. And I was like, yeah, that would be super cool. So I did. That was one of that's where, like, they had, like, a professional, like, movie makeup artist type thing, and I was very glamored up, and you can find pictures of me just, like, not looking like myself. I actually had gone recently through some of the VODs of that event, and I found it very obvious that I was trying very hard to not speak quickly on the desk. So to me, I had, done that thing that you kind of have to do, which is you go from one extreme to the other before you find a fairly good middle ground. But I don't know if my performance at BlizzCon actually really affected anything in the future, but I'll get into that later. So I did BlizzCon, felt on top of the world. At BlizzCon, I talked to the Nation Wars guys about doing another one. Did Nation Wars. So I did Leipzig first. Then I did Nation Wars. That Nation Wars was less of a great experience for reasons that aren't to do with the tournament itself. It was I stayed there. I was in France for a month, and then I had to go back, and like 3 weeks later for a week. But the time that I was there for like a month, the living conditions and the behind the scenes quality was I've often attributed some of my back pain issues to the month I spent in the the French equivalent of a Bates hotel. That was not very fun. Things like I would they set up as an Airbnb saying it had 2 rooms. Actually only had 1 room. That wasn't gonna work. Then I got put in a hotel. The hotel was rinky-dink, very small, very poor quality, honestly. Then they would be like, oh, you'll have a streaming setup. And I did most of the time. I did go to the office once or twice, only to find that none of my stuff was there. So that was kind of scary. And just, there's a lot of like unimportant shit overall that I don't blame anyone for. But yeah, it was not it wasn't as cool as the first time. I guess I'll just put it that way. Still love to do Nation Wars again, and I'd absolutely stay in Paris for a month, but I think I'd be very firm on some other things. Is basically what it was. There was a lot of like, this isn't great, but I'll live with it. And I don't think I would do the same thing. So I did that. Then that was the one year that they actually told us what events you're going to do for that year. Never happened again, and I don't know how often it happened before. I don't think it did. But 1 year, they said you can do Leipzig, you can do Montreal, and then we'll talk about BlizzCon at the end of the year. And I was like, great. So I did Leipzig in the beginning of the year, and I knew that I was going to do Montreal at the end of the year. So I didn't have to feel bad if I missed any of the other events. And that's what my setup was. I don't think very much else happened. Then I did 2018 Montreal, which was kind of that event was when I did the finals of Cyril versus Rayner with Pig, which I think a lot of people remember. And I think it was a very good cast for how easily Pig and I worked with, despite having only done like one cast previously. And it was also the one time that I was kind of starting to experiment a little bit more with being more of the hype person or being more of the director of the duo, being able to throw and lead the conversation and stuff. So we had extraordinary games, extraordinary storyline. It was really easy to be a good cast, and I think it was. And not only that, but it was one of the few times also that we got told, hey, you're going to do the finals with this person. Otherwise, mostly what happens is we all discuss who should do the finals and then kind of mutually agree on who should do it. So that was the first time that it was like the head honcho was like, you and Pig are going to do it. So I took this as a good sign, and the finals cast went really well. But I had been dealing with, I guess, some like negative issue stuff, personal life stuff. So I'd actually taken like a 2-week break before Montreal and streaming. I did Montreal, felt on top of the world, felt great. BlizzCon was going to be decided soon. Long story short, I didn't get that BlizzCon, got really depressed because I was already depressed, but that kind of was like an additional kick in the gut, especially because I didn't get any reason as to why or why not. Even after everyone was like, kind of, like, oh, you'll definitely get it. And nope, didn't get it. Don't know why. Don't ever have conversations about it. Really not a reason to even think about it too much, because basically you just start thinking about all things you did wrong and it just spirals. But that actually might not be the reason, so I'll never know. But I took that as just a sad, depressive, okay, I guess that was my fault. I'll do better next time. Worked my butt off in 2019. I think I'm doing it correctly chronologically here. In 2019, I want to say that I worked my ass off. I want to say that I worked about as hard as I could because I never wanted to have that feeling of like, I guess I didn't do well enough. So I did Montreal that year, and I did another event, but I don't remember what event. Oh, you know what? I don't think I did, actually. That was the year of great turnover. That was the year that a lot of people at Blizzard were let go, and we only had the 2 Kievs and a Montreal, I think, right? So I only did Montreal that year. But I did a lot of Challenger that year. We were flown out to Burbank for a weekend, for 3 weekends in a row. And I put a lot of effort into that. It was a really tough broadcast. The hours, long hours, starting at like 6 a.m, also flying on Friday night, going back Monday morning, or even sometimes Sunday night. And I thought I did like a really good job. I thought there was people actually started to comment on how much they thought I was improving. Like I posted my notes that I took for like the summer season, and people were like, we noticed that you really knew your stuff. In chat, people were saying that like, oh wow, ZombieGrub really came prepared, because I had like previously studied this one particular style and it came up in the game, so I got to sound like a fucking genius. It was that perfect, everything lined up type of moment. And I thought my actual overall casting quality was better than some of the stuff that was happening with my co-commentators, if I'm being completely honest. Some of the experiences for those challengers were not entirely inducive to great broadcasting and great co-commentating, I guess is the most vague, nicest way I'll say it. So I was feeling great about my commentary. I was doing more leading and interviewing. I was hosting more, and I like interviewed the players and did a little like the guest commentary of a Laser and Lambo. I was the one that led that, and I felt like I was really improving in a lot of fronts, knowledge wise, camera wise, looks wise. I find a good style for me, I think. Whereas that previous Nation Wars also, they didn't tell me it was going to be fancy, and I had to buy like really dumb blouse. Anyways. And I was getting recognition from peers, and I was getting recognition from the community. So I thought I was like nailing it. And then it came to Montreal, and I had basically heard through the grapevine that it was between me and another commentator as to who was going to go to BlizzCon. So hearing this, I also tell the other person, because that's fair, right? And I work really hard. I'm like doing the studying, and I'm doing the storytelling, and I'm doing the notes, and I'm working on being a better play-by-play and hype. And I'm like, I'm gonna really knock this out of the park because I don't want to have last year happen again. Now, there were different people in charge for that particular year, but they wait a fuck long time. I'm still a bit angry about this. They wait a long time to tell me I didn't get it. They had already told a couple other people that they weren't going to go, and then I was like the last one that was told. And I was coming back from like TwitchCon or something, and I was getting off the plane, and I read that I wasn't getting the job. I remember I got so angry that I think I scared the guy next to me. I think he was worried that I was going to like start crying or something. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to fucking punch something. I felt a great injustice, to be honest. And this might sound pompous and like, you know, like, oh, calm down there. You're not that good. But I felt great injustice. So I even had a call with the people in charge, and I was like, why did you make this terrible decision? I was done being, I guess, shy and submissive and being like, oh, I guess it was me. I guess it wasn't good enough. I was like, no, I fucking earned it this time. You guys made the mistake. It was fairly close to saying fuck you, but that would have been bad. So I basically was just like, I know it's a really difficult call for you to have. Thanks for having it with me, and goodbye. And yeah, that was the call that I had. And that was 2019. The end of 2019. And while I eventually got over it, or did I? Hard to tell from this podcast. It still was something that I had not decided to be like, I'll do better next time. No, this time I was like, okay, there's not room for me. The people who are there will always be there, and waiting on scraps is getting too frustrating. I can't keep doing this. So I really started to think about what else I could do in the sphere. Now, looking back on it, I think one thing that is very important about broadcasting in esports is that you should never be in a position where you need the job. Now, that sounds really harsh, and it's not something I would have wanted to hear when I was in that position, because not only did I need the job, I thought I deserved it, which can be a big difference. If you need the job, you definitely don't deserve it. Well, then you definitely shouldn't be talking. But regardless of any of that, you should never really be in a position that you absolutely need it. You should always have a backup. This is going to help with negotiations, so you can be like, yeah, I don't have to do this. So if you're not going to give me a fair rate, then, you know, come back to me when you will. It also is going to help with unhealthy emotions, because while, as I said, like, maybe I'm not over it, what I didn't want to have happen, what I felt terrible about, what I didn't like about myself at that time, was that I was taking out some of this feeling of injustice on other people in the scene. Not externally, but internally. It was a lot of like, I did better than that guy, like I deserve this, like, and that, even if it's true, it doesn't matter. You're turning yourself into a worse person when you start having all of those feelings. It's okay to contemplate and to think and to discuss, but if you find yourself just becoming a more hateful person, then that's bad, right? So I definitely didn't like that part about it. And that was also a reason for me to be like, I need other things. I need to do other things. I don't want to feel like this ever again. Not in the, oh, I guess I failed feeling, but in the, oh, I'm a bad person feeling. I didn't want to do that ever again. So I started thinking about other stuff that I could do. And that's when I started doing some variety streaming. And just thinking more about the stream and like what I want to do. I got into voice acting. I wanted another avenue of income and potential future post esports. I got into voice acting. Funnily enough, as I went through this change, this important life moment, I actually had a string of really fortunate events. I went to Australia like 2-3 months after that BlizzCon. So that was January 2020. I went to Australia. I got invited to Ozcraft just on a whim almost, and it was fucking awesome. I loved it. Loved Ozcraft. Loved Australia. Then I got the Katowice job, which to me meant more than the BlizzCon job actually. While BlizzCon job is awesome, especially if you actually are in the arena, which I did not get to do in 2017. I'd felt the, I guess, bureaucracy of Blizzard in past events kind of weighing down. I felt like IEM and ESL were actually more prestigious, more fun, cooler to work with. They had different ideas and different approaches, as opposed to what was the same thing pretty much over and over again. So I actually took this to be better. And was thus very excited and really did a lot of prep work for that as well. Got in a really good shape too. And then fucking COVID happened. Right. But that's I guess kind of like a bit where my story kind of peters off a little, because then there's the COVID year, which everyone's gonna have their own amazing yet kind of lame story. It's like living through interesting times is not actually that interesting. But I was pretty much on top of the world physically, mentally, emotionally for Katowice, and then with COVID, it went totally sideways, totally opposite. Still kept on a brave face for these online broadcasts, but these online broadcasts are also a bit soul-sucking. Not just because they're online, but because of the extreme amount of work that has been given to us for these broadcasts is not exactly great. So again, like a similar feeling of like, I don't want to start blaming people who are trying their best, but I am getting really irritated. So trying to work through that. I got to do some hosting, which actually is probably the highlight of 2020 for me, is that there's actually a very good work year. There was a lot of work, even though it was a lot of work. And I also got to do a little bit more role experimentation. So I had worked on my play-by-play mostly in 2019 and felt pretty good about that. I had not done any hosting, but I was a lot more comfortable leading. And so when TSL 5 came around, I think I actually mentioned that I was looking forward to doing a little bit more hosting, which again, it's not like a host role for that event, but because there's the interview, because there's the guests, because there's the run of show, someone has to be in the directing seat. I was the one that happily took that on just to get the experience. So when the first DreamHack came around, they were like, oh, you mentioned that you liked hosting. Would you like to do some? And I was like, yes, please. So I did the DreamHack Summer 2020 event with like 6 hosting days or something like that. I worked I think I worked like 13 days or something. And like a bit less than half I might have been hosting. And I thought it was pretty good. I really was glad to get the experience, especially in a bit more of a low stakes situation. I learned a lot about not just hosting, but also stuff like, the more that you experiment with all these roles and the more that you push yourself out of your boundaries, the better overall you're going to be. And I found that especially true when I tried the hosting thing. So that's why I've talked a lot about it on this podcast with other people. But, being able to banter a little bit more, to get out of these weird situations with grace, just to be able to connect the dots narrative-wise a bit better. These are all things that that is the role of a host. So I really appreciated getting the practice and just being able to say that, like, yeah, I can do hosting. I'm actually, like, pretty good. Went back, checked over the VODs, maybe I wasn't good as I thought I was, because I don't think anyone ever watches their VODs and goes, yeah, that's exactly how I felt. I'm pretty fucking good. I don't think anyone does that. But who knows? Maybe someone out there does. But I still think that I did a really good job. And I think I do a better job than other people out there, which is very vague. But for one reason or another, I never got invited back to doing any hosting. I actually requested to do some, and then I think it was just miscommunication, what it boiled down to, so I never did it again. And I don't know if I'll be doing it anytime soon, but the kind of funny thing about hosting is that there's kind of like a joke that if you do some hosting, suddenly you'll do nothing but hosting. Like, it can be hard to get back into casting. And Kalaris has talked about this on his episode on this podcast, if you want to go check that out. So I think we kind of joked about that, but I was never really worried because we still had a couple of very stable hosts. I see, Kalaris obviously hosts a lot, and I think Nathanis is a fantastic host. So I wasn't really worried about being like shoehorned into that role. Especially, I guess the other kind of fear is that it would be so easy for me to, because women are often hosts. It's a bit more rare to see the woman commentators, but that's a separate issue. Point is, I want to do it more because I want to practice it more and have that on my resume. I saw a lot of things I wanted to improve on, but I just don't feel like I get the chance. And that's been a lot of, I guess, StarCraft commentating in general. Every time I go to an event, I feel like I was like, damn, I need to remember not to do that or to do more of this next event. And the next event's like 3 months away. It's really hard to remember. And online broadcasting in between just it's not the same. It's not, I can try and do some of the things that I think about, but it's not the same. So that happened most recently. I went to Stockholm over June, July, and same thing. I was like, damn, I really think I did this wrong, and that was okay, but this wasn't. And I just want to continue improving, but the next event's 3 months away, if I even go, which is not a guarantee. So that's, I think that's about as detailed chronologically as we're ever going to get for the casting life of ZombieGrub. So, did I miss anything? I don't know. Maybe I did. But that's where it come down to at this point. For the last couple of minutes here, I guess, I'll answer some of the questions that I've commonly asked people. So, look at my sheet here. How do I prepare for commentating? I look over the general tournament structure, keeping in mind prize pool, points, players, how the players got there, any seeding that happens, that type of stuff. General stuff that actually might not really be that important to bring up, but actually can be. Like, prize pool is often not pushed a lot, and I think that it should. Reminding people that $20,000 is on the line can be very impactful. Very easy for people to understand if they're like, what the fuck's going on? You can be like, $20,000, and they're like, I don't care what's going on, that's a lot of money. And then I get a little bit more specific with how the players are doing. I take some of the League of scores, even though it overall doesn't matter. You just kind of have to contextualize it. Obviously the past history, recent results, because even though I watch a lot of StarCraft, honestly, I don't keep up with everything, so it's very easy for me to be like, oh, this guy hasn't really done very much. And then for my co-commentator to be like, actually, he just won this event. And I'll be like, oh, that made me look really bad. So I try to make sure that's covered. A lot of basic stuff, but it's still very important to keep in mind. Then I actually write down a list of storylines that I think can be impactful. So some things like the map pool being particularly favored for one or another. Is mech going to be big? Is Korean dominance over? Those typical things. Then I do some StarCraft studying. I try to actually get in there and analyze the differences of builds and VODs, but to be honest, that's not as much as a focus as I guess people say it should be, but I would disagree. Narrative building and contextualizing is far more important than noticing the adept has been 2 seconds late, faster. Sometimes it is important, to be fair. I think build orders are important to story building, but then I think there sometimes is too much emphasis on that. I guess I'll put it this way. It's never a bad thing to study and to learn, ever, as long as you always are able to contextualize it and zoom out a little bit. But is it the most important thing to being a good StarCraft commentator? I would say no. And I think most of my guests have said similar things about it in other esports. But anyways, do I read any feedback? Believe it or not, I do, and I probably shouldn't. But I always try to see the whole, like, if everyone says you're blank, then you're probably blank. I do try and keep that in mind. Any feedback that stuck with me? Most of my early career, people would say that I was monotonous, that I was too flat. And I think I've really improved on that. So nothing recently has been something that I've been like, oh, always think about that. Yeah. Do I appeal to casual or hardcore fans? I think appealing to the casual fans is more important. As a commentator, the desk can be used to go into more hardcore detail, but I think the way StarCraft desks are set up, no, it isn't. StarCraft desks are too quick and human focused, which sounds weird. I think you have to go for storyline and banter. I think the way StarCraft is set up and the way that we can, our strengths include how much of the friends we are, and we should be pushing that angle a lot more than let's break down this gameplay. But again, people will probably disagree. How important is it to focus on the mechanics of speaking? I would say very important. It's a lot of subtle things that people just often can't explain. And when they try to explain, they often do it incorrectly. But I think the mechanics of speaking with your voice can be very important, is very important, and is not necessarily the baseline, the thing that you work from. But I think it's a foundation that you can continuously work on as you improve in other areas as well. Should there be a play-by-play commentator and a color commentator at all times? Nope, don't think that has to be happened. I don't think so. I do think there has to be a certain amount of credibility, might not be the right word. I think there has to be, is from recent experience, I do believe that there should always be a senior and a junior. And there's moments where the junior commentator can become a senior commentator, but basically you want to, there's a certain point where commentators are kind of generally accepted amongst the overall community and are seen as staples. And there's points where they're not. Before that point, before whatever event makes that happen, they're not. And you want to make sure to have, for big moments, so the most important matches or the final, something like that, I think you should always have the senior and the junior. I don't know how else to put it. Or two seniors or whatever. But play-by-play and color, I don't think it has to happen. I do think, I guess actually maybe for the finals, I actually think that there should be both. So that's more complicated than I thought it was. Generally, no. For the biggest event, the biggest moment, yes. There should always be both. And specifically, I think the color commentator should focus on working more with the play-by-play commentator than some of the earlier matches. In the earlier matches, I think the play-by-play commentator has to work more with the color, creating opportunities to speak in detail about the events. But then when it gets to the bigger, more high-profile, more eyes watching, it should be more about making sure the casual audience has something to grasp onto emotionally. Anyways. Do you have to be high level? No, I don't think you have to be high level. I think playing the game that you're commentating is always beneficial because there's just some things that are innate to the feeling that you could study, but you would have difficulty explaining unless you've been in the moment. And to that same kind of line of thought, me being 6,200 MMR does not put me in the same mindset as Cyril at 7,200 MMR, right? Like, there's nothing I can do to actually be in the same headspace and same feeling of what Cyril is going to do. So reaching for that absurdly high level, I think overall is a bit pointless. But I do think playing the game, even at a level of beginner, is important. And then otherwise, it's just about studying. Watching what the players do, watching what they've done, and getting as many stats as you want, watching as many games as you want, connecting as many storylines as you want. That's more important. Why do you think commentators get bumped from BAS tier commentators? This is the epic tier list I talked with Maynard about. Personally, I think it's actually a lot to do with how long they've been in the scene and how many events they've cast in the scene. One, it makes you a better commentator to do more. Sure. But two, I honest to God think that there's a lot of there's a lot of first impressions that get cemented and deteriorate over time. But that can take a while. So someone's like, oh, she's monotonous. If I did 12 events that same year, I think by the end of the year, they'd be like, oh, she's okay. But instead, 12 events in StarCraft takes, 3 years. So it's kind of about breaking those initial expectations, IMO. So it's a surprising amount about just how long you've been in the scene, how much work you do in it. Let's see here. Is building a brand important? I actually think it's the most important thing. If I was a little bit better as a showman, merchant, businessman, whatever, I would have actually branded myself as an analyst, because that's certainly what people were telling me I was, because I wasn't play-by-play, I wasn't hype. And I never felt comfortable doing that, but honestly, I probably should have. As soon as you put esports commentator in your Twitter headline, that's already going to be in people's minds. And if they can't find a goddamn thing that you've done on a broadcast, they won't go, this guy's a liar, he's not an esports broadcast. So they'll go like, oh, I guess I missed something. But esports broadcaster, I think branding's extremely important. And on that note, not just branding as far as analysis or play-by-play or something like that, but also just branding yourself as someone who wants to be a commentator on the main stage is very important. Is there anything to learn from other esports broadcast production? I think there's loads to learn, and I think we should be looking more so at what other esports broadcasts are doing, because they have the flexibility and money to experiment. They can do things that fail, and people go, don't do that again. And then things that work, and I'm sure could work in our scene as well. So I always bring this up. Here it is again. CSGO has an event where the little break segments, the desk, the talk show that's in a tournament, which exists in a couple different esports or traditional sports as well, a little halftime show, right? Is them in a pub drinking beer, holding microphones. And I think that would work wonderfully with StarCraft. But we don't ever change. Do I watch other esports? I do. I watch a lot of other esports. CSGO, a decent bit. Valorant, decent bit. Started to watch a little bit of Rocket League. I haven't actually liked it as much as I thought it would. Weirdly enough. What other esports do I watch? I've checked out Hearthstone. I've checked out Heroes of the Storm. I pay attention to some of the drama. Overwatch, I watch a decent bit of, because I think their broadcasts are some of the best in the world. and there's a lot of pageantry. So it's kind of just like on that level, it's okay to watch. So yes, I watch a lot of other esports, and I think it's overall a good thing to do. I've learned a lot about what I like about commentators and production and broadcasts from watching other people. Is there anything to learn from traditional sports broadcasts? Yes, there's something. There's something to learn, but I actually don't think there's a whole lot. The pacing between traditional sports and esports is so different, and I think that actually is a bit universal. Even Rocket League, which is probably the closest thing we have to a traditional sports pacing, it's soccer, but in, space or whatever. I think they still do very different stuff. And I've read a couple of books on traditional sports broadcasting, and their advice is often things I cannot see ever using, like making sure to remind radio listeners that the score is 7-0. 2 or 3 commentators, always 2, never 3. Even in a casual setting. Personally, I hate it. I hate being the third wheel. I wouldn't want to acknowledge that I'm the third person who's supposed to do X or Y. I want to have that flow and banter that I think works perfectly with 2 people. Even if it's super casual. Yeah, 3 people, it's too many cooks in the kitchen. Do I have a hype song? I do. It's Bullpen by Dessa. Do you deal with imposter syndrome? No, actually. I think I see this a lot. I hear this a lot. But when I'm told what imposter syndrome is, I almost never really resonate with it, which is odd. As much as I've had doubts about being a good commentator, I've actually never once been like, do I belong here? I've always thought either I belong here, but I could do better, or fuck you, I belong here. And I think that might just be a personality thing, but it also might be because I've been here for 10 years at this point. So if I don't belong here, I am in trouble. And I think that's about an hour and a half, almost on the dot. All right, then. There you go. Caster Calls with ZombieGrub. Episode 35 has finished. So I hope you guys enjoyed the ride. If you have any questions or comments, it is I pay attention to them on YouTube, so put them there. And just go ahead and do the shout outs here, since I don't have a guest awkwardly listening to me. A thank you to everyone who supports over on the Patreon. You guys aren't going to be charged for this one. It's a freebie. It's on me. And you won't be charged for at least 1 or 2 months. So, but thank you to those who support, and especially to Nick, Vinny, Steven. Thank you guys for helping the podcast, especially so. So that's about do it. That's good. It's good. It's been a good experience. It's been a wild ride. I've learned things about interviewing. I think I'm actually a better interviewer because of this podcast. I've learned things about reaching out to people. I'm a better, is there a word for that? Networker. I think I'm a better producer. Kind of, not really. But I understand some of the frustrations that go along with it, I guess, a bit better. And it's overall been a really good experience. So I hope you guys enjoyed this particular podcast. Look forward to seeing you guys in the future. And if you have any suggestions about what would make this podcast better without changing the core idea of the podcast, then please hit me up either in the YouTube comments. I also have a public email, all that type of stuff. Okay. I will see you guys in the near future for episode 36. Bye-bye.